23 past 9, more calls, 1300 222 774, 1300 222 774. One of the key battlegrounds as we approach the state election is going to be the comparative policies of the government and the opposition for Melbourne's port expansion project. It's well understood that the Port of Melbourne is approaching capacity, and longer term, over the next 20, 40, 50 years, where will the port expansion go? The government is committed to expansion in Western Port at the Port of Hastings. The opposition have announced that they are committed to expanding the Port of Geelong. It's going to be a crucial battle of ideas as we head towards November. So I was fascinated when I got an email from an academic telling me that there was an organisation called SCAN, the Supply Chain Advisory Network, who were hosting a luncheon tomorrow at the city of Wyndham to debate exactly this. I thought, oh goody, we can grab onto that and learn about it at the same time. And blimey down, it's Hermione Parsons, Director and Associate Professor at the Victoria University Institute for Supply Chain and Logistics, who turns out to be the expert on it, and Hermione is someone I knew 25 years ago, but there you go. Hello, Hermione Parsons.
Hello, John Fang.
How bizarre. But there you go. You've become an expert in supply chain and logistics. Tell me whether or not Western Port is the idea or Geelong is the idea that we should pursue as we look to the future.
Well, I think the first thing, John, is that this is too important for politics. It's a multi-generational project. It is going to affect every child, woman, man for the next 40, 50 years. And unfortunately, these sorts of infrastructure projects become very political because of the nature of politics and wanting big, lovely infrastructure to show economic development.
And part of our short-term disease is an oppositional political culture is if they're for it, we're against it sort of thing.
Well, I think that's probably true. Successive and consecutive governments have supported Hastings since the 1960s. And one of the reasons we've become involved is because as an institute we're independent and we're into research, and the Supply Chain Advisory Network and that you referred to before has about 40 odd companies at every point of the logistics chain that are involved in this network with us, and we represent many stakeholders as well. And one of the things that I realised recently is that just about everyone I talk to in the industry, and I have a pretty vast network, none of the logistics people can see how it will work, that is Hastings and Western Port. And they can't see how it will work in terms of mega ships, or the ships that are supposedly to come, and they can't see how it will work in terms of the land side. So the issue of whether it's Western Port or Geelong is sort of maybe missing the point, because this is about international shipping companies and where the market is, and how cost-effectively the landside logistics businesses, the exporters and the importers, can move their freight via a single point in the chain called a port.
Because every time you move from road to rail or rail to ship, that costs money.
Exactly. And also, in the land side, a really important point is if you were trying to move your freight through a highly congested, large metropolitan area like Melbourne, that is an astronomical cost.
So if you're going to have train loads of containers going from factories on one side of town to the Port of Hastings, which means going through Melbourne's southeastern suburbs, how are they going to do it?
Well, that actually, the rail in that context, if you had a dedicated freight line, that would work quite well. But most of our freight, in fact nearly all of our freight, metropolitan freight, is by truck. Our rail infrastructure is not good enough to do it. Everyone understands that it just can't deal with the capacity. So the Victorian Freight and Logistics Plan, which focuses absolutely on Hastings to be developed, also focuses on a rail link, which is called the South East Rail Link, which is supposed to move freight from Dandenong along the rail line that goes through Caulfield, Malvern, Armidale, Toorak, Hawkesbury, South Yarra, crosses the river to Richmond via Flinders Street Station.
Where's the city?
Flinders Street Station near Docklands, then Southern Cross Station, all the way through to, say, Tottenham Rail Yards, where it can then join the interstate link. You see, John, all of the landside logistics for, infrastructure is on the west of Melbourne. and 70% of the freight, according to the Port of Melbourne Origin Destination Study, 70% of all containers come from the west of Melbourne, the western north and west of Melbourne, and the west of Victoria. Only a tiny percent comes from, say, Gippsland
So if you,
and the southeast.
If you flip it all to Western Port, you've got to basically get it then from the deep, because they say, oh, Western Port's a deep sea port, and that doesn't need dredging, but then you've got to get it from there to where it's going to need to go.
It does need dredging. It's a deep water port. Hastings is being planned for 16 metres. 16 metres is to attract the mega ships. The mega ships can really carry about 18,000 TEU containers, 18,000. Our current ships are really more like carrying 4,000 TEU. At the size of the ships, about 6,000. But these megaships there's only a handful of them in the world, and therefore the major ports like Rotterdam, servicing a port, Rotterdam, east-west trade, Rotterdam is servicing a population of 350 million. There are about a handful of these megaships across the world. They don't come near Australia or Melbourne. The other thing is, whether we have a big port or not, the size of the vessel is determined by the shallowest port in Australia. So each ship goes from Fremantle, say, to Adelaide, to Melbourne, to Sydney, to Brisbane, and whichever port is the shallowest determines which vessel size. It's not in the interests of private operators to build these massive ports. Therefore, the 16-metre isn't really necessary.
Okay, and then there's all the environmental issues. Now, the Labor Party plan for Geelong, we're told, will need perpetual dredging.
Perpetual dredging is normal for any port. That's maintenance. That's basic maintenance. But what we're very concerned about is the people, the social, the environmental issues. We're very concerned about these issues blocking approvals, yet the industry must have capacity and must have sensible landside logistics that's cost effective, and it needs to have a port in the right location. We believe the alternative planning needs to continue, that the Hastings should be, we ought to rethink the whole thing, hence we're using this pre-mortem technique. We need to open our minds and reassess the assumptions. We think it's the Port of Melbourne or something to the west of the Port of Melbourne. Not necessarily Geelong, but something to the west of. But we don't actually need to do that massive port expansion anyway.
It's the start of a very steep learning curve for many of us. It's good to be able to pick your brains and good to see you in the studio. Dr. Hermione Parsons from Victoria University's Institute for Supply Chain and Logistics, and she's speaking at the City of Wyndham tomorrow at a luncheon organised by SCAN, the Supply Chain Advisory Network, and that will be an issue that is not going to go away. The Minister for Ports, David Hodgett, wants to have a chat. He'll join us after the news headlines for the government's response. Your calls as well, 1300 222 774 after the news headlines. Stephen King's on